So I see a few different versions of this. There are people who they study martial arts, and for their own reasons. In their mind, firearms are a completely different category. And so that's one category of folks. And there's another category of folks that say, well, it's can be somewhat integrated, the same principles, but really firearms are in a completely different category. Then there's I'm simplifying, but there's a third category of people that say combat's combat. I mean, there's only what works and what doesn't, and there are many ways up the mountain, perhaps, and I'm of that theory. I mean, hey, if it works, it works. It doesn't matter how you got there. But, and along the way, it sure would be nice to be a good human being, right? So this gets into the ethical, pieces. But in that third bucket, there are people going, well, I mean, why don't I know about that? That is a weapon. And even if I have no plans on using it, it sure would be nice if I understood how it works. How do bullets ricochet? Do they ricochet? I mean, is it, because nothing's like the movies. How exactly do people train to use these firearms, as we call them, in English, and then how do they actually use them in various and assorted confrontations, and why? Much like in the old days, you better believe people understood the spear, and they understood the bow and arrow when it came out. They figured it out real quick. The shield and the all kinds of things that the shield was used that you don't see in movies, actually. But back in the day, it was just as much a weapon as anything else. Not just a shield, but shields. So a firearm is simply a modern day extension of that. It doesn't mean that you need to be an expert in it, but to me, since as you aptly stated, I like to look at the self-defense aspect of these things. Let's say you're a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioner. That's great to me if they've never once looked at, if I'm in grappling range and a firearm is introduced into the scenario, how does my art, what is the self-defense, literally the self-defense aspect of my art as it pertains to this situation? And the answers to me are very simple. I mean, a grappling art is 100% applicable in grappling range. It doesn't matter if there's a weapon or not. Or people say, I'll just pull out a knife and, so what if I'm in your guard? I'll just start. And the truth is much more complicated than that. A position of control is a position of control. It doesn't matter if you're using this weapon or this weapon or this weapon. It complicates things immensely if you're holding a sharp object in your hand. But a position of control is still a position of control. So
it sounds like you would say that, in your perspective, people who study self-defense or martial arts for self-defense, that firearms, or at least a basic understanding of it, should be included, that it shouldn't be neglected and left as a...
Yes, I think so. And if we're, much like was stated in the seminar that we just got out of, if we've got, brain memory, neuro, we've got neuromuscular, and that's brain and muscle. We've got these memories and things. If the first time that we see a firearm introduced in this scenario is in a real life scenario, yeah, of course we're going to flinch anyway. But now it's not even in my OODA loop. It's not even in my decision matrix. Like, it doesn't have a bucket to go into. So once I actually realize what's happening, right? Yeah. So much for shortening the OODA loop. I can't even get through my OODA loop. And we probably shouldn't train for someone producing a katana. You could, and it'd be a lot of fun. And I think the principles that people train based off that back in the day, it's just fascinating to look at that and see how that influenced arts that we sometimes practice today. I mean, it's just absolutely fascinating. And honestly, the Japanese, the medieval, what people did in full armor, and the tactics that they used, I'm seeing some of that we're getting back to in modern day militaries, because guess what? Once again, we're wearing armor. The technology's come around to where it's worth it to wear it, whereas before it wasn't worth it. And nothing would stop lead. And now we've got stuff that stops lead. So now we're okay, well, now I'm bulky again. What does that mean?
Right.
And when it comes to close combat, wearing armor, because hey, back in the day, not everybody was an archer, right? I'm seeing things come full circle. So there's actually some crossover. But if I'm a serious self-defense practitioner and a teacher, is it worth our time if we train, against somebody producing a katana and literally trying to cut me in half? It's just not worth our time. Firearms, I think it needs to be there. Not 90% of the time. I mean, you're not going to see them 90% of the time. But if the first time you see it is a real situation, you're doing yourself a disservice, much like a blade.
For me, this is a big one, and there's definitely a gap here. I see people, especially through my comments, saying, "Oh, best self-defense, just get a gun permit, start firearm permit, start carrying it." And I would have, because my country is, it's actually fairly easy to obtain.
I'm sure there's a process.
Right.
But if you go through the process...
Well, it's fairly easy. Just nobody does it. It's not out. Doesn't mean... but there's that possibility. It doesn't mean I won't meet again.
Sure.
Firearm. But then the question is, a lot of people would say, "Oh, get a firearm, best self-defense. Don't even practice martial arts.
Don't waste your time, perhaps."
Right.
Right.
And, what do you, as a very experienced person in this realm, how do you consider the statement that firearm, carrying it around with you, that the best self-defense and that solves all problems?
If you carry a tactical flashlight in your hand, which 2 decades ago, I mean, you'd be lucky to get your hands on, and they were expensive. And now you can get them at a hardware store for, 10 euro, 15 euro, and a 200 lumen, 300 lumen flashlight in someone's eyes. Hey, I mean, if a hand in your eye matters, well, a flashlight in your eyes matters too, and it's literally blinding you. Not to mention, if you need a flashlight at night anyway, well, you might as well learn to use a thing, because you're going to have the thing in your hand, right? So it may or may not be a good idea to have something in your hand, but let's face it, you're going to have the shopping in your hand. You're going to have, things. So anyway, I need to train to use this, tactical flashlight for my self-defense, or I need to train to use this mace, or this stun gun, or, you name it, a pen, a Kubotan, whatever. A rape alarm might not hurt anyone, but maybe it will do some good, because it's a rape alarm. All of those things, including your cell phone and having 911 on speed dial, none of those things are any good in a self-defense situation unless you have them in your hand and you're ready. And the same thing goes for a firearm. Now, I know some competitive shooters, and they're amazing. And it's tactical, self-defense based competitive shooting, and they are amazing. I mean, everywhere during a competition, they'll be sitting like this because that's the scenario, and it's go, and they are, rounds on target, multiple. They're amazing. So yeah, that exists. The thing is, that's a competition, and they're waiting. It's a sport now. They're waiting for it, right? So if you're walking around all day switched on, you can say you're switched on all the time. Human beings can't do that. You can't do that. And if you do that and attempt that, it will have consequences to your psyche. We know this now. So especially in a civilian realm, if you're walking around, you can try to be switched on all the time, but you're not going to be, threat. Not to mention, are you going to recognize the threat, right? So there's an active shooter shooting. If you're trained and you've mentally rehearsed this groove, there's a high likelihood that you'll get to some cover and take this, or make cover by sending lead, that way. Sure, but that's not an ambush. That's you walking up on a fight. There's this guy killing people. There's somebody with a knife stabbing people. You see him over there, and you decide to close. Interesting decision, but you do that. That's not an ambush. Then maybe you can dig the mag light out of your purse and decide to hit somebody over the head with it. But otherwise, you need to have the sucker in your hand. But otherwise, you're not weathering the ambush. Because in ambush, hey, you got the time, wham! Or you're standing too close to the buttons on the elevator, which is becoming classic, and excuse me, and you don't do anything, and then excuse me, and that loads, this thing. The gun's no good there, right? So you need to have something for close quarter other than a weapon. And then, oh, by the way, what about the weapon in close quarter? So the military example is, if I'm part of some kinetic team, direct action team, and I'm going through a door and I've got a bunch of guys behind me, That doesn't matter where I am in the stack. Yeah, I might have a long weapon and I've got a sidearm somewhere and a knife, maybe a couple, all right? But still, I come through the door and my job is to go this way because of whatever, and then somebody tackles me this way. Or I choose to go this way and somebody tackles me. Hey, I'm the first guy through the door. Now he's hugging me, standing up or on the ground. Gosh, what do I do? You know, and there are things that you can do. I mean, you get a position of control, pull his face into whatever gear you have, because now your weapon's here, and I don't want my face pressed against all that gear, right? So you do this, you know, as a distracting attack to get back out to where I can index something, or you know, push him back out. And there are ways to think of the grappling positions of control. There are ways to shoot short distance and long distance, a grappling range out to short distance, out to long distance from all these positions on the ground. Just absolutely fascinating, but they don't work if you don't practice them. Same thing in a civilian setting, and it's not that difficult to tell that someone's carrying. So if somebody wants a weapon, they can take it from you. All they have to do is come up behind you and hit you in the head with a brick. Right? You should have seen them coming, but what if you don't? If you do weather that attack, you know, or you saw it coming, and well, now what? Now they're on top of you desperately. You know, they've showed their hand. Now they're desperately trying to get to your weapon, and you need some options, because if your whole thing is this, you know, maybe it doesn't need to be that. Maybe it needs to be this. You know, simple stuff, but gosh, if you don't practice it, it's more of a liability than anything else. So just like everything else, excellent tool. Have you practiced it when in such a way that it works at 2 a.m. in the rain when you're surprised? You know, if not, then maybe you need to go back to what you're practicing. So I think it's kind of a short answer for a huge thing, but that's from my view, that's where that is. So we're looking at safety. If I'm really interested in safety, and there are more and more firearms around, then don't I need to at least be able to recognize that something is a firearm? Pick it up. Yes, that's me. Pick it up and clear it and render it safe. You know, so we've got, without getting technical, I mean, you've got several different kinds of actions, several different kinds of firearms. A responsible human being, in my opinion, if you have the means, you know, should be able to recognize that this is a weapon. It's just here, you know, and who knows why it's here. It doesn't need to be there. Safely pick it up in such a way that, you know, I take all the rounds out of it, however this sucker works, double check it, to render it safe, and walk it to the nearest police station or wherever, you know, it needs to go, rather than shoot your foot off or worse, just trying to render it safe, or being too scared to approach it and letting someone else come up and shoot their toe off, you know, or an innocent bystander. So guns don't really kill people, stupid people kill people. There's that safety aspect too, that gosh, I mean, everyone should know how to change a tire.
Yes.
Everyone should probably know how to give CPR. Everyone should know how to defend themselves, and everyone should know how to clear and render safe a firearm. Not that hard to learn, but I just wanted to throw that out there.
Oh no, it's great.
I think it's important.
I really resonate with. I mean, I really see your point. I remember I was reluctant. I learned driving a bit later than most, but then one of the main motivations for me was I had this imagination, but still I imagined a scenario when somebody is in trouble.
Right.
I need to drive them to the hospital, and
I've never done this before.
I don't know how to do it, and then suddenly I fail someone. And the same I imagine sometimes with a firearm, where I feel I still need to. I learned a bit, but I still need to.
If you can learn to drive, you should probably learn how to drive.
Right. And with the firearm, I would imagine, what if there's a gun in my hands, and I do need to use it to protect someone else. For some reason, and I don't know where's the safety or whatever. I'm like, what?
Or simply render it safe.
Right, exactly.
You know, it sure would be. And if you get a successful disarm, which instead of a fancy disarm that you see in the movies or whatnot, a disarm would be there's a shooter, and the shooter is no longer a threat. That's a disarm, whether it's, you know, because he's bleeding on the floor and unconscious or whatever. Chances are now I have this firearm, or you come up on, you know, the aftermath of something and no one's touching that firearm, and you're like, really? I mean, I know about fingerprints and all that, but the dude's right there. You know, let me just
Make sure.
render this safe.
Yeah.
While everyone else cries over there, I'm still sane. Let me do this. You know, yeah, seems like a good thing to know.